Welcome, everyone, to this webinar, which celebrates such an important aspect of daily life, which is hope. The International Day of Hope is on the 12th of July, and this year's theme is such a wonderful theme. It's about building our future together. So, collaborative opportunities to look at health and well being across the lifespan. And we have a wonderful webinar for you today. But before I go further, let me acknowledge that I'm coming to you today from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I take this opportunity to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and future. So, as you know, we have these webinar series which look at ways in which people in our economy are looking at health and well-being. And today we're going to focus on a very specific aspect of that, which is the caring economy. But before I ramble on any further, let me hand over to Anna, our wonderful director, who will introduce our participant for today.
Thanks so much, Vanita. Our guest today is Carmela, who is the CEO and Managing Director of Care Economy CRC and is also an intellectual property attorney. Carmela, thank you so much for being part of our discussion today. To start with, it would be great to learn about your professional journey and why you're focused on the care economy, because I imagine there are some people in our audience who maybe don't know what the care economy is and what that involves.
Yeah, firstly, thank you, Anna, and thank you, Vanita, for the invitation to speak on your webinar today. And I'd like to acknowledge that I'm also coming to you today from Ghana land. Um, so I'd like to kind of start my professional journey, given today is the International Day of Hope, to just kind of reflect a little bit on my background and where I've come from. I was the first female in my family to finish high school. And so I'm certainly the first female in my family to attend university. So my parents immigrated to the country, to Australia in the late 50s and settled in a small rural town in South Australia. And country folk by their nature are entrepreneurial and are problem solvers. So that set me in good stead. Um, in terms of my alma mater, I come from Flinders University, of which I'm immensely proud, and I also went on to study at the University of Melbourne and the University of New South Wales. So again, reflecting on that International Day of Hope and the ability for people to get an education and to drive forward their interests, I'm really quite fortunate and very, very lucky. My first job was working in a small biotech startup. It was focused on medical manufacture, and it was a company that was spun out one of the very first CRCs in Australia. And it was eventually went to what's called a public offering, so it floated on the stock exchange, and then was acquired by a large European company. So I've been on the journey where we started with a couple of people in a small company, and then we grew to a large company, and then jobs were lost because the company was acquired and went off overseas. So that really sparked my passion around commercialization and the effect that can have on our industry to grow jobs and to grow capabilities for Australia, and really drove me to start to think about, well, what can we do in our country to retain this incredible intellectual property and the things that we do and to keep it in our country. I then went on to work for a commercialization company within a hospital, which drove my understanding around the impact that health and health innovation can have on people. And again, reflecting on that International Day of Hope, when clever people come together and drive those initiatives around health, some pretty incredible innovations can occur. And so over my career, I've held roles in generic pharmaceutical companies, in hospitals, in medical research institutes, and one of the biggest kind of proudest achievements in my career is working very closely with Professor Sue Gordon, also a fellow South Australian. And together we founded and established the Aged Care Research and Industry Innovation Australia, or otherwise known as ARIA. And that really focused on the capability of the aged care workforce to innovate. And again, grounded on those principles around innovation and driving care and health and well-being outputs, really kind of came through. From there, I moved on to the Care Economy CRC. I'll tell you a little bit more about the Care Economy CRC a little bit later as part of this webinar, if you like. But I'm now the CEO Managing Director of that, and often when I reflect back on that, again, the first in my family ever to finish high school, I feel very humbled and very, very blessed. But again, reflecting on that International Day of Hope, absolutely my message would be to any female out there in particular of migrant background that you can achieve what you would like to achieve. And that's a sort of a description of my professional journey in terms of where I find myself today.
Fantastic. And it sounds like a lot of different experiences, particularly that starting experience you mentioned from that small to large company where, you saw the impact of commercialization and how that impacts the people themselves. I think often, we think about the positives of different, there's benefits to a business being bought out or having that acquisition, but of course, the individual impact on people who lose their jobs or lose key functions they used to have, or they have to suddenly pivot into different roles can be so challenging. And, it sounds like you've got a lot of that perspective around different impacts, but also, some of the ways that these sectors can also help and innovate and support health and well-being. And you mentioned CRC. I would love to know a little bit more about what that means, as well as, with the CECRC, what the aim is and why it's important.
Absolutely. Thanks, Anna. So, apologies for the acronyms, and I do use them a lot, and I just want to highlight. So a CRC is a cooperative research centre. It's an initiative funded by the Australian government through their Department of Industry, Science, and Resources. It really gives long-term funding to solve industry challenges, and we've, as I mentioned, I've been fortunate to have led the Care Economy, or the CECRC, the Care Economy CRC. We've received funding through the CRC program to operate for a period of 10 years, and our goal is to improve productivity across the entire care economy. So the CRC model has been running in government cycles for over 35 years. It has the bipartisan support through government, which is rare and is really quite helpful. As I mentioned early in my career, I came out of a company that spun out of a CRC. So I've been around CRCs for a very long time, and I'm a big supporter of the way that they bring together industry and researchers to bring an evidence base to solve the problems facing the industry challenges. So, very recently, Cooperative Research Australia, an organisation that is a kind of a body that represents all of the various CRCs across the country, combined with a group called the Rosetta Institute to release a report called CRC Catalyst. That's available on their website, and it's a really lovely summary of how business can get value from the CRC program, and it deep dives into the potential for small to medium enterprises in particular, and the benefit that they can see from being involved in those CRCs. But typically, CRCs are bring together industry, research, government, and community partners to come together to solve those complex national challenges and those productivity challenges. And again, referring to the theme of today, International Day of Hope, it's a really great vehicle to tackle some of those really often complex problems that require a coordinated and concerted effort. In terms of our CRC, the Care Economy CRC, we are a 10-year, $129 million initiative. We focus on technology solutions, data solutions, and workforce innovation across the care economy. So the care economy typically tends to be a laggard in taking up technology and innovation. And so this is one of those really big problems that the CRC is a perfect program in which to sort of tackle it from that perspective. So we do our research across those three themes, and our aim really is to co-develop with the people who receive the care, as well as the people who deliver the care, fit for purpose solutions that support the productivity, the quality of care, the workforce capability, and sustainable care service delivery, and ultimately to improve care outcomes for people, and people across Australia. So rural, regional, metro sites, really aware of the differences between those sectors, and the effort that our CRC has to put into really targeting those areas.
That's such an important theme as well with collaboration, and something Vanita and I talk about a lot with how much can be gained from different partners kind of collaborating together and recognizing that there's unique problems to be solved or unique issues to be addressed with targeted solutions, and the idea of sort of combining those different sectors and knowledge bases and skill sets to really make sure that the solutions are supporting particular people and their unique needs, as you mentioned, fit for purpose solutions. And that's such a positive way to be doing it. And it's improving productivity as well, which of course has those economic benefits. There's flow-on benefits across society. So it's one of those things that has such a clear benefit, but of course, it's not always being thought about because businesses can get quite siloed, or, there's only so much money as well, that sometimes there's, opportunities that could really benefit from these kinds of initiatives. So, really great to make sure that people are aware of this, but also really understanding that impact that you're making for solving those particular challenges for people with specific needs. In terms of what you're dealing with as a CRC, there's multiple sectors across the care economy. What do you think is working really well, if we start with that?
Yeah, I think what's working really well ultimately is the desire to improve care and well-being. I think what's really important to note is all of the care economy sectors are facing tremendous pressures, and there's they're constantly in the news with the various royal commissions and those sorts of things, and it can be quite dire, and it seemed to be it's quite a sort of crisis reporting element. But what works really well is the workforce are so committed to what they do. And again, the International Day of Hope, and that there's a real human connection and a part there that really stands strong and stays firm across these sectors. So and I think that's common to all of the care economy sectors. Nobody in this who works in those sectors is not there for the reason other than they want to make a difference and they want to see a benefit of what they do. And it's the human interaction and that human component that's really, really important to that.
Absolutely. And having purpose helps drive productivity as well, feeling connected to the mission, feeling connected to working with others who are also equally passionate is so powerful. So, any way to make this work better and encourage that collaboration is so meaningful. So that sounds really necessary, particularly for this sector. But what do you think needs to improve? What are some areas where there's potential opportunities for things to be a little more effective, or,
Yeah,
yeah.
and that's a great question. And look, that's why the CRC exists. We exist to try to transform the way care is delivered so that we can improve some of those more tricky areas that the workforce and that the providers are facing. The pressures that they are facing are common, as I mentioned, shared across them, and they're things like the rising demand of care, where we're hearing over and over that that we can't build enough aged care homes to service the needs of the people who are likely to age over the next 50 years. But aside from the infrastructure piece that is kind of again shared and common amongst all of those care sectors, it's the workforce issues. So we're currently, care economy is the largest workforce in the country. 1 in 7 Australians work in the care economy in some way, shape, or form, and it's growing. It's growing at a rate that is, I would say, is unsustainable in terms of what's required to service the growing demand of the care requirements. You've seen recently in the news the NDIS reforms and trying to rein in those costs. There's changes to the aged care. These are common across all of the care sectors, even early childhood education and care, the desire for all children to access it, but there's no workforce, and the infrastructure piece is missing. So these are the sorts of shared challenges across the care economy. From a CRC's perspective, what we're doing is really bringing together all of the partners to the table to try to have those conversations and understand what we can bring from a research perspective to solve some of those challenges. As I mentioned before, the technology has a tremendous potential for impact in these sectors. Technology can improve the productivity of care by taking away some of the administrative burden, freeing up the workforce to actually deliver the care rather than filling in the paperwork and all of the other sorts sorts of things that are required. But it's not a simple fix to just simply apply technology to these sectors who have traditionally been resistant to, not resistant, I'd say just laggard in terms of switching from a paper-based to a technology-based. Simple things like all their workforce don't necessarily have devices, and particularly in aged care, it's frowned upon if your care worker comes in and is on their phone. You want them to be present with you. And so there's certain barriers in the uptake of technology, the usefulness of those data solutions, and really reflecting on our program of work, that workforce innovation piece that makes those new innovations stick and be genuinely able to be rolled out over time. So as a CRC, we're bringing together all of the stakeholders, including the people receiving care, because at the end of the day, if that solution doesn't work for the workforce, if it doesn't work for the management of the company, it needs to work for government, it needs to work for the person receiving care, then it won't be used. And so we're not in the business of wasting precious resources on research, which is great research, but not necessarily applicable and will directly have an impact on improving care. So that's our approach to the CRC, and we have a partner cohort of around 53-ish is what I'd say, partners around the country who are all working towards this mission. We're hoping to make a difference over the next 10 years.
And it's interesting what you mentioned about those unique barriers, because there's a lot of talk about how technology and AI can streamline processes and make things more efficient and free up people to be doing certain tasks, or focusing on certain delivery and freeing up their time from other administrative processes. However, it really depends on where the baseline is. You mentioned that in some sectors it's not that common or not necessarily acceptable to be using a phone constantly. So then how do you transition someone to potentially a solution that is more mobile phone based, or it's a platform that they can put in all the information maybe on their phone, and then it feeds into a system which then saves them the paperwork later, but then it's doing a disservice to the person receiving the care, who feels they're not being listened to, feels they're not having their full attention. And it's an interesting conflict between something that is a good solution but potentially has some quite significant barriers, and there's these generational differences as well between expectations of technology and what people associate technology to be, and how it can be beneficial, but also how it could actually have that unintended consequence of coming across as care provision being worse, which is so many different challenges. So the way that you're collaborating with lots of different partners, I imagine there's lots of feedback coming through, which helps to mitigate some scenarios where a solution is provided and then actually here's something we need to consider. Let's make sure we tailor this to be more appropriate or more suitable. But yeah, very interesting to imagine how many unique challenges there are to just trying to make things easier and try and retain talent and encourage, people to stay in this sector, particularly in the current climate where burnout is so high across all sectors, particularly in the care economy where people are confronted with so much in the day-to-day work. So sounds like there's lots of opportunity to just help support the sector. And
Yeah.
in terms of Australia specifically, how do you feel Australia currently fares regarding the care economy and support for this sector, particularly considering we have a lot of micro and small businesses in Australia? There's lots of different kinds of businesses in Australia. So I'd love to know what you think in terms of our specific, country and our circumstances here.
Yeah, sure. So I think throughout the webinar, I've referenced specifically to Australia. The CRC is Australian funding, so our activity is focused on the Australian ecosystem and driving forward the activities there. Look, care services and the care economy are at the centre of Australia's economic well-being, and I think that statement is true for any country internationally around the world. If you don't have your care settings right, the social fabric that holds together your economy disintegrates. So I think that these services are really closely tied to the prosperity of our country, because care impacts the lives of all Australians, our lives, our children, our friends, our parents. There's just, you cannot, as a human, focusing on that human element, care is really, really important and integral, not just to our social well-being, but also to our economic well-being and to the future prosperity of our country. So care economy spans services including what we call community healthcare, so healthcare that's provided not necessarily in a hospital setting, but within a community setting, early childhood education and care, housing and well-being, youth services, disability, which has been a sort of a focus here in Australia of recent times, aged care, which again, with growing demand is an increasing focus in Australia, family services and mental health. So those are the sorts of services. And if those settings aren't right, people can't go to work. So it impacts our economy. If those settings aren't right, people who are at work have to leave work because of certain elements. And traditionally, the care economy work falls on women. It's women who do the care. It's the mums who leave to pick up the child from childcare who's unwell. It's those sorts of elements. So it's really kind of it's central to I believe how Australia operates in terms of a fiscal benefit.
Absolutely. And that's a good point just as to how intertwined this is with everything. Because if we think about workplace productivity, there's a lot of research that shows the impact of productivity, how it can be impacted by things like financial stress. Financial stress has a huge impact on productivity because part of your headspace is consumed by how worried you are about money. Add care responsibilities to that, particularly with the likes of the sandwich generation, where you've got kids and parents maybe being cared for at once, and also trying to hold employment, some of these people working in the care economy as well, where they've got additional burdens and pressures and stresses. It's such a critical sector, but even at a baseline, there are so many challenges facing people who are working generally. So I think there's a lot of need for these services, but particularly the care economy. It's such a critical sector, as you mentioned, that's really at the heart of society. So it sounds like this research is really really beneficial. And in terms of research funding, this is something that research funding is often labeled as inadequate. Who do you think has the greatest role to play in promoting these kinds of outcomes? You've mentioned government, you've mentioned different businesses, different sectors, individuals. Do you think there is something, is there someone who has the greatest role to play, or is it this real need for collaboration?
Look, I think collaboration is key, and I think again, reflecting on the sector that I represent, any one of those groups couldn't do it on their own. The solution, quite simply, just wouldn't be effective, and it wouldn't, as has happened historically. There's just there's plenty of digital and technology solutions that exist out there. They haven't been uptaken by the market because they haven't been developed and designed in quite the right way. I think the government have a really strong role to play in funding some of those foundational elements around that research and development. But the beauty, I believe, of a CRC program is that it's co-funded by industry. And again, if industry and markets take the lead on these really sort of tricky elements, then we wind up with the right solution. I think there's absolutely a central role for government to fund some of this work, and the CRC program is a really lovely description of how that works in practice, and works in a really good way that brings together the industry, the government, and the researchers and the end users to come up with those right solutions. Um, I think that they all really have important roles in shaping those practical solutions, and any one of those missing then changes the flavour of the output that comes through. Um, I do believe there is a strong role for industry to co-fund, and again, it's a straight up government in the sector that I'm operating in is not necessarily the 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 response. And the reason that I frame that in that way is that government currently fund the services to deliver the care economy, and again, showing fiscal responsibility and being mindful of that government funds are our funds. They're still taxpayer funds. There's a limit and a reasonable sort of nature that needs to be applied to that test. The industry do need to come in and back that in and support that and create those startups, as I mentioned, and then can grow and provide services internationally, learning from the things that we're doing and creating that economic value resulting from particularly in the care sector. I just want to reflect a little bit, Anna, that the care sector and the care economy traditionally hasn't been considered as a real economy. It's not considered a real sector. It's this kind of thing that people do, women do primarily for free. And I think one of the valuable things that we've done through the Care Economy CRC, and also through the Prime Minister and Cabinet's task force a few years ago, which is the Care and Support economy, workforce, and task force and strategy is really elevate our sector to highlight the importance that it's not invisible, unpaid work. This work is important. It underpins our society. And again, reflecting on that International Day of Hope, there is hope to improve it. There is hope to innovate within it. It is a real sector and deserves the same attention that agriculture or mining have to drive innovation. And I think certainly through our Care Economy CRC, that's something that we're delighted to be finally having some support through the Department of Innovation and Department of Industry Science who are fantastic and the right department to be funding innovation work to really genuinely transform the sector. And the Department of Health, Disability and Ageing are the right department to be funding the service delivery. But again, this is all public funding. So there's a requirement, I believe, for industry to co-develop and to co-fund and for government to really start to shape that market. And we're looking at those economic benefits that span beyond improved care and improvements for Australia into, well, what does this look like for a technology product that can be sold overseas, because they have the same problems in other countries. And we're a smart country that can really start to put our mind to solving some of these problems and creating viable products and businesses from that effort.
Are there any learnings from overseas that you think are applicable in Australia, or anything interesting that you've seen abroad that, translates well to our market or doesn't really apply?
I wouldn't say that it doesn't apply. I think in general we have to be mindful that different countries have different cultures, and so their approach to caring is different depending on the culture from which the basis is coming from. The similarities that I would say is that the majority of countries are reflecting the same challenges that Australia is facing. It's this increased demand, and that results in a change to the social fabric of the way that the countries operate and the way that their economies operate, because care is now becoming a significant issue across the globe. I wouldn't. I mean, I can't point to immediate solutions for that, and different countries have got different approaches and different ways of doing it. I think our approach in Australia, certainly through the Care Economy CRC funded by the department, we're in a good place to start to lead on some of those initiatives. We've certainly got some great startup companies in Australia who are already working well towards that. And when you're looking at solutions like reducing administrative burden, you've got companies who, like for example, Heidi Health, who are looking. They develop scribes to capture the voice interactions between the carer and the person receiving care, and just automatically transfer that. So you're picking things up without having to put it into a phone. It automatically. So there's lots of Australian companies who are innovative in this space and who are poised to really make a difference, not just in Australia but also globally.
I love that. And I think that ties in so well with our theme for today about hope, because Australia's got such a good opportunity here. As you mentioned, there's lots of great initiatives. There's good companies who are developing innovative ideas, and hopefully that means that we can lead some innovation that supports other markets as well, but also that just reinforces the positive efforts that are being done here and helps to improve the need, because as you mentioned, the care economy is so critical to the economy and society and individuals, and particularly with an aging population, the needs grow more rapidly. So I feel really optimistic based on everything that you've mentioned. And, it's, I think, really important for us to reinforce that point you made about industry as well. Government sounds like the government's making a lot of efforts and there's funding going towards this, but the private sector, industry has a lot of additional funds that could be really beneficial to improving so many different sectors. So thank you so much for sharing all of your perspective today. I'll hand back to Vanita to conclude our session, but so many interesting thoughts there and lots of, I think, important considerations for, this sector and how things could be improving and how important all of this work really is.
Thanks so much, Anna.
Thank you, Anna. And Carmela, that was such a wonderful discussion, so insightful and so well connected to the theme of today. You know, you've described your own journey. So, from the point of view of individual hope and the migrant journey, you know, not just getting an education, but getting into innovation and looking at ways in which that can then inform caring is such a wonderful story that other migrants can draw hope from. I love the fact that the Care Economy CRC is really crystallizing the concept of care being an economic factor, not just a social unpaid factor, particularly given that it's primarily women who work in this sector. I'm currently doing health and well-being from the point of view of psychology, and more than 80% of the workforce is women working part-time, balancing caring responsibilities. So it sits in the heart of everything that has been my personal experience as well. What I love the fact is that you've got this collaboration across government, industry, the patients, the workforce themselves to come up with solutions which are human-centered, no matter who that human is, whether they're the leaders of the sector, whether they're the users of the sector, whether they're the government who's then supporting the service delivery. Absolutely fabulous to see. And last but not least, I think that there's real hope, even though sometimes, you know, we tend to get drawn into the things that are going wrong in the sector. And I agree with you that the Royal Commissions have highlighted specific issues which are important to highlight, but I think it's equally important to also balance that with talk of hope. And the fact that you are bringing together people to work together, the government to fund the initial work that is required, as well as the service delivery, but then the industry to find ways to commercialize the output of this and take it to export, as you're mentioning, is a wonderful way in which you can solve a wicked problem that no one sector can solve on its own. So I look forward with hope. And last but not least, I myself did my PhD supported by a CRC. And I know that when I was presenting overseas, people were amazed that there was this structure in place in Australia which would bring together research and industry and then allow the industry to benefit from it. So I think that we should recognize and be grateful being in a country which really values research and evidence-based practice. So thank you so much, Carmela. You've given us hope, not just from an individual point of view, but also from the point of view of the care sector, as well as innovation in the broader industrial sector. So socioeconomic well-being is so closely tied to the care economy, and we wish the CRC the very best over the next 10 years.
Thank you so much, Vanita, and thank you for the opportunity to address the audience today.